Barry Levinson is one of the country's top film directors. He was born and raised in Baltimore. He entered the business as a comic writer and performer. He made his directorial debut in 1982 with the coming-of-age classic Diner. It marked the first of his Baltimore films, which include Tin Men and Avalon. He has also directed such critical and commercial successes as Rain Man, Good Morning Vietnam, and Bugsy. His latest, Wag the Dog, stars Dustin Hoffman and Robert De Niro.
You're the producer. What did you do? See, nobody knows what you do. The producer, I mean, all he's got is the credit. You see? Some plaques on the wall. They don't know what we do. Stan. Don't get me started.
Oscar award-winning director Barry Levinson. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
To have you here. Wag the Dog. First of all, why the title Wag the Dog?
Well, that's Mamet. Mamet...
David wrote the script.
Yep, he wrote the screenplay, and he hit on that title, and it just seemed, it worked. I mean, with the beginning we explained, why does there's a tail wag the dog, that whole, that riddle to that. And it was so offbeat that in the beginning everyone said, well, that doesn't work. And then at a certain point in time it begins to register, and then I think, it's a crazy title, but I think it works for the movie, and now it sort of finds its own language.
Tell me about this movie. I mean, your involvement, the casting of it, the script, why you did it.
Well, it came about in a kind of crazy way, because initially Dustin and De Niro wanted to work together, having done a small part in Sleepers. And De Niro's company, with Jane Rosenthal, they acquired this book, and they were interested in that, and they got a screenplay based on that book. And I said, I'm just not that excited about this. I think there's some interesting ideas here, but overall it doesn't really intrigue me. So we all got together in San Francisco, and we were talking about it, and I kind of went off and I said, kind of laid out a different direction to go, and they were intrigued by it. And I said, look, we can go here, but we're going to make a big departure away from that existing material. I talked to David Mamet about it. We shared a lot of the same, thoughts about, politics and show business, and David got intrigued and started to write it, and it evolved into this. But the most interesting thing is we finally got a draft that I thought we could have a reading of, and we had a reading in Los Angeles. A lot of actors came in, and it worked extremely well. And then we were faced with that decision about what to do, because I was going to start shooting Sphere in February, which means we'd have to wait a year plus to ever do Wag the Dog. And I said, what happens if we just shoot it really cheap and, like a 30-day schedule? And everybody agreed to go do it that way.
What did it cost you to make it?
$15 million.
$15 million, that's all?
$15 million, yeah.
With De Niro?
With De Niro and Dustin and Dennis Leary and Anne Heche and...
Willie Nelson?
Willie Nelson, and it worked out that way.
Is that because they all wanted to do this so much they're willing to take the back end?
Yeah, basically, because it was just the fun of the material and what it was about, and the fact that we can just really, work quickly, because we shot in 29 days. It was a very kind of fast schedule, and we kind of all jumped in and, tried it.
What's it about?
Take the risk, I think it's the blurring of the lines between, show business and what you can produce, and politics that leans more and more on show business to begin to, make their points, and it begins to blur the lines between, what is politics, what is entertainment, what are
Let me interrupt you and give you the storyline first for the audience before they understand this, if they haven't seen it.
I can never give storylines.
All right, here's the storyline. Here's the film that I saw, and then you tell me what the film you were making. Maybe we'll get somewhere. All right? Wag the Dog is a story. There's a president, and the president has a little problem because some Girl Scout or something complains that he harassed her in the Oval Office so far. All of a sudden, the president is facing election in a couple of weeks against his opponent, a right-winger played by Richard Dreyfuss. Richard Dreyfuss says, I'm in trouble. And who does he turn to when he's in trouble? He turns to for the lack of a better word, a Dick Morris figure played by Robert De Niro, who understands everything there is to know about how to communicate to the American people about politics and how to win elections. You got a problem. There may be a sexual harassment thing about this president, and if it gets before the public, then he's got a problem in terms of winning re-election. So he hires, he brings in De Niro, whose idea is, let's create a war. Wars are played out on television. Maybe there's not a war. We'll create a war because we know how to create images on television, and we'll just fool the American people because that's what we're about. It works. Now, that's the storyline. Dustin Hoffman plays the producer they turn to in Hollywood to create the television war. How am I doing so far?
It's good. Let's make that movie.
Okay. Is that the movie you made?
Yes.
All right. But it's about what, in terms of your mind, politics, how television, in a sense, has distorted the nature of our democracy.
How you can twist and reshape and basically blur the areas so that it becomes almost sleight of hand. You divert attention from the issue to something else. You move the story to another story.
Right.
If the
you
story
got a war,
of
people
the
forget about scandal.
then you move to that, and you know that you're playing with a short shelf life of maybe, because at some point the press is going to catch up. So you might have a day and a half.
Yeah.
At that point, you got to move past it to another story and keep doing it, because in the end, which is more important? The story that you lay out, because if that's a good enough story, the truth that is found out may not be as good a story and it won't matter. If you take the Gulf War and the woman who went and testified about babies being thrown out of incubators.
This is Washington in Kuwait, and in Washington, D.C., a Kuwaiti woman who turned out the story wasn't quite true.
Wasn't true.
And she testified before Congress as to how horrible those people were and what an inhumanity and obscenity it was.
And it wasn't true.
It wasn't true.
And it was a PR firm that worked on it. But by the time the real story came out, no one remembered.
Yeah, and the war was over.
And then they're on to another issue. So it's how you can use and manipulate and abuse, the media for short periods of time. And that's the kind of game they play.
And what does that say about us?
Well, it says that we all have a lot to learn. We're all going to have to get a lot smarter about it. Everyone from, the American public to the media, and how all that manipulation takes place. Because there are people whose job is to find out how to move you to another place, to divert the attention from the real issues and what is really important and what needs to be taken care of. And it's kind of a shell game, and it's a very, very sophisticated game.
Now, it's one thing to find some young Kuwaiti person who will go and testify before Congress with with the approval of significant people. That's one thing. It's another thing to create a war on television. Is that going over the top? I sat with one of the three anchormen after this, and he said, I didn't like it. I said, why? You know what I'm talking about. I said, why? He said, it's just over the top. He said, De Niro showed it to me, and I told him that before we made the film. Over the top, it's unbelievable. Couldn't happen. It makes us look more stupid than we are.
Well, because I think he's extremely sensitive to the fact that you can. There's no question that you can fabricate videos that will be credible. Right. We're not trying to stand up and say this is the ultimate. This is an indictment of it all. I mean, it is a satire. But you can, with the technology, create videos that are so credible that they will have an enormous impact once they are put on television. Once they are found out to be fake, we may be past that point in time. There's no question that you can fake things. Can you do it for a long period of time? No. They only get away with it for about 4 or 5 hours on television in our movie. Before the CIA is already on, so the spy satellites say this is not happening.
That didn't happen, yeah.
And then that story is dead, and then they moved on to the war hero story, and they keep moving it down the line. So I understand the sensitivity certainly to a news anchor, because it hits at a place that can be not always
Tell me what satire is, in a sense. I mean, we know that you take the extreme to make a larger point. What else is it to you in terms of?
Well, it's getting harder, because sometimes you feel like we're living in a satire. I mean, there are so many things that come up on a daily basis that we go, what? Yeah, exactly. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I know.
That's too crazy.
It wouldn't happen.
It can't happen.
A woman would not accuse the president of taking his pants down,
and just day by day, there are these stories that keep emerging that almost seem completely preposterous.
And even obscene, too. I mean, you look at what's happening in Algeria, you say, and nobody did that. That wouldn't happen. They wouldn't do that to women and children. Same thing happened with ethnic cleansing in terms of the horror scale.
Yeah. Things you think are absolutely beyond comprehension do in fact happen. And so what you do, if you're using, when you're playing with satire in a sense, is that you have to take something that is familiar enough to be able to twist it. Someone said, well, we know about some of these things. I said, of course we do. we have to know the game in order to make fun of what's taking place. You know, that's where satire works. You have to take that which we are familiar with, and then you kind of twist it and turn it on its head, and you expose us all for being, you know, less than, you know, terrific.
Before I show the clip and we talk about the making of this movie, do you think, I mean, you think we're in trouble here in our society because of the capacity to do this, to fool the American people? Let me just make the point that the president, reelected, high in the polls, acknowledges that, and Dick Morris, who did, acknowledges that it was television commercials run early in the campaign that sewed up that election for them.
Well, I think
Not that they were unfair or unreal,
right.
but
I think that we're talking about a greater phenomenon in a sense. We're never, I don't think any of us understand the impact of television on our society in the second half of the 20th century. It is a brand new invention that came into the house, and it has altered everything that it has touched. I don't even think we understand the ramifications of it, and the good and the bad of it. It's an enormous subject to try to figure out. That camera, you know, that presents information or entertainment, so can turn and twist us around. It's very hard to figure out. Is a side to it. One day I was watching an old rerun of Groucho Marx show, and, you know, the quiz show, and they had someone coming on, and you can see how uncomfortable they are. They go, "Yes, Groucho, we're here from so-and-so," and he'll make a joke and they get a laugh, and they kind of look around and they're extremely uncomfortable.
yeah.
That doesn't exist now. Everybody's got a TV savvy about them.
That's right.
Right? You say, well, look, it just got learned. Somehow we just absorbed that. So it's what this phenomenon is something that I think we've just begun to scratch the
And
surface.
it might be dangerous.
In some ways, and
in terms
positive.
of a democracy, in terms of...
Yes, I think there is a real downside to it because we're reacting instantaneously to events, and we're not getting an overview. We're getting piecemeal information, and we have like to hit the switch right away rather than taking in the full context of what it means.
Commercially, you did well your first weekend, yes? In small towns and in conservative communities, this film played well. When I saw you at a screening before I went away for the Christmas break, you were worried. What were you worried about?
Well, I think I think you always have to be worried about anytime you do a movie that is about something, because the second that you do a movie about something, you always have people go, "Well, I disagree with that." Yeah. If you do pure entertainment that has no significance at all, it's like that's all it is. You go, you leave, you go home. So I wasn't sure, you know, how accepted we would be. As it turned out, we got great acceptance, and we've played towns very far out of New York and L.A. and Chicago, and they laugh probably harder than, say, the screening that you attended in New York. They get bigger laughs out of it. Now, the question is, does that mean that the American public are actually more cynical because they have now come to realize, in a sense, all of the things that have taken place? I don't know how to register it, but it's very nice that they have a good understanding.
I think it means they're smarter than too many people in Hollywood and New York think they are. Yeah. That's what it means.
That's what I would hope, because if that's the case, then maybe we can stop. You know, we're always so constantly, you know, trying to hit that low common denominator, and there's a point where it becomes tiresome. And
people don't do things they want to do because they say nobody's going to like it.
That's right.
And things get passed on that have a chance.
A lot of things, a lot of good material that friends that I know that can't get a movie made because they say, well, it's too small an audience it's going to appeal to. Yeah. And if you don't explore it, what you're doing is you're shutting off parts of the audience.
And those people who make those decisions will say no to something for good reason because they believe that they'll point to something else and say, look, it doesn't work. And probably the reason it didn't work in the first place, the point that they use as an example, because it wasn't done well, not because it was a serious subject. Would you take that?
Yes, I would agree. I think that the audience out there is hungry for a lot more diversity than they're being fed right now.
Having said all that we say, this is a funny movie, written by David Mamet, with especially Dustin Hoffman. Roll tape. Here's a clip again.
Would you vote for that person based on that commercial?
You know I don't vote.
Why don't you vote?
Last time I voted that one time, Major League Baseball, when they started the fans voting thing, and I voted for Boo Powell for first base. He didn't get in, and it just disappointed me. It stayed with me. It's futile. That was it.
You've never voted for president?
No. Do you vote?
No. I always vote for the Academy Awards.
It's great. Isn't it?
He's wonderful in that.
Yeah.
But I love is how sincere he is. You know what I mean? He's so sincere about it, and he says these things with great sincerity, as opposed to kind of a buffoon type of performance.
And let me just be naive, but I mean it deeply. It's because it's acting. That's what a good actor does.
Yeah.
He finds a way to say it that has those qualities.
With that kind of credibility and get the humor out of it without having to be big and say, "Look at me, aren't I funny?"
Yeah. Now, is he playing Bob Evans?
No.
Everybody believes he is.
I think they always say it. You know what the funny part of it is?
Bob Evans is a famous producer
Yeah.
who thought like this, evidently.
I don't know what he thought. I mean, I don't really know him, and Mamet doesn't know him, and Mamet wrote the screenplay.
Hoffman knows him, and he's the one who created the character. Come on.
Yeah, but he doesn't. You know what the funny thing is? It's too. I put it this way: it's like you're making a movie with bigger issues than trying to be Bob Evans.
In 100 years,
Well,
you're not going to
can't.
convince me this is not Bob Evans.
No, it's not. In fact, I said to him one time, to Dustin when we were talking about it, in terms of this guy has to have extremely fast rhythms about him and the way he talks and moves. And I don't know Evans well. I saw him on one of the talk shows.
Yeah.
Was it with you?
Yes.
And he has a much different rhythm of speaking, and it's much slower and it's more halting and whatever. We would never be able to make that work.
Yeah,
but the point is the denial.
It's the attitude that we're talking about, I think. I mean, it's not just the way he speaks. It's the attitude and what he says when he gets it out. It's not the rhythm of the speech.
Yeah, but I mean, I could give you probably 10 examples of producers that you don't know as well that all have that kind of sensibility.
Yeah, right.
They all have this incredible thing of that all things are possible.
Yeah,
They all have to. Because
and
they're salesmen. That's what they are. They're saying, we're going to do this thing, and they create this, and they get people excited to go ahead and get involved.
that and they have the sensibility that says it's more important to vote for the Academy Awards, and they're more important than voting for president, too.
Yeah,
yes?
Yeah, they
I mean,
have
the
that.
life is about that community.
It is about them as well.
Yeah.
And that's why Bob Evans can say, it's me. And this is what I say. Even if we say that,
It's not you.
It's not
We
you.
didn't know you.
And it's part of like the WAG whole thing, because no matter how much we deny it, we can't convince anyone of
Well,
that.
because there's also evidently some famous video in which Dustin does a parody of Evans from 20 years ago.
That's right. And then he asked the question, and who sent out that video to let everyone know that? Who
Could
sent
it
it
have been
out?
Bob Evans?
Because I made the movie with Dustin, and he never told me about it, and no one of us knew about it until we saw this article that was written about it. And I asked Dustin, I said, "What?" And he went, "Oh my God, that's like years ago."
And who sent it out?
Well, I mean, you'd have to go back to the source.
And?
I don't know. Maybe it could be Bob Evans who sent that out, said, "Look, here it is," and
It's me.
then denies it all. I have no idea, to be honest.
All right. Let's roll another tape. Wag the Dog is the film.
We had a war, we forgot the hero. You can't have a war and not have a hero. It's like we sent him the Christmas card and we left out the, what do you call it?
Fruitcake.
There you go.
It's great. It is great. I mean, you laugh, and you've seen it 100
I've seen it 100
times.
times. He makes me laugh, and I love the way Dennis feeds him the line and that.
Yeah, I
He's
do
taking
too.
off his shoe and all that. I mean, I had a terrific time doing it. I think we all enjoyed it, and the fact that we had to do it in such a different fashion, shooting so quickly, and they had so many lines to learn, and pages per day or whatever.
yeah.
But it was a great experience, and I'm still amused when I watch it.
I am too. I mean,
I'm
I
glad
saw it
that
once.
you are. That's good.
Well, I'm from the South. I mean, I'm one of those places you didn't know would play well.
That's what's terrific.
De Niro.
Yes.
Hoffman's the star of this film, yes? It's
Well,
his,
I think-
it's his movie. It's Dustin's
Well,
movie.
it's the showier role of the two, but I think what happens is that Bob, who has to works in a different fashion because it's the quiet, introspective guy who's really moving everything around all the time. I think if you really examined it carefully, you would realize how good a performance that is. It's like when Dustin did in Rain Man and got all the attention. And now I hear from a lot of people say, Tom Cruise was really terrific in that. And I think the same thing applies, because one is the showier role, but if you look what Bob has to constantly do to make it all hang together, because he really has to center the movie.
Tell me about Rain Man and Cruise and Hoffman in that film. I'll come back to Wag the Dog. The performances you got out of them and what you had to do. This is a film that if you described it to some executive and said it's going to make $500 million or whatever it ended up making, he would have said,
Impossible.
Impossible. Tell me the story again. It's about you know.
Yeah. No, it wouldn't have, on face value, look, we didn't even do that well. We opened up at a $6 million weekend.
Yeah.
You know, when you think of movies doing $40 million weekends, we did $6 million to open, you know, and ended up doing $175 million domestic and $230 million foreign or whatever it was.
Yeah, and then you had video and the rest of it.
But it worked. It kind of got in there and it worked on a certain level, and it was just those two guys on the road.
Is this the kind of movie you really like to make? I mean, you look at Dinah, you look at Rain Man, you look at Good Morning Vietnam, you look at this. What do they have in common?
Characters, strong characters. You know, you don't always have to identify with them completely, but I think you can appreciate, you know, what they are. I think there's that thing that somehow an audience connects to, and there's a looseness about it. I mean, it's got to be a little open-ended. I mean, we did a lot of improvisational stuff in Rain Man, where we made up a lot of segments on the road. When he was in the motel and he wouldn't go out, it was all made up, you know, improv stuff that was, you know, put together in a certain fashion. But to let the actors have the freedom and let that role really grow as we were literally crossing the country.
Roll tape, Rain Man, Dustin Hoffman, Tom Cruise.
Now, when you dance, you can't watch my feet the whole time, so you're going to have to look up. And when I tell you to, I want you to just look up, real slow, just keep moving.
Mr. Levinson, you know about you, you sit and watch these movies as I play them back, and you're in love with movies.
I do like movies.
I mean, you sat there as if you had just seen it for the first time.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen it in years, actually. I almost never watch the movie once I finish it.
Really?
No, because it's done, and what can you do except sit and watch? So I never
And
do
worry
it
about
to
the
be
things you didn't
entertained
do.
by it.
Yeah.
So.
I know, you can't be entertained by it
Well-
because you're so concerned with excellence and doing the best you can.
And you're doing with the work you're doing, so you watch in terms of how to fix the movie as you go along. Once it's done, it's done.
You love the collaboration of the movie business?
Yeah. I've loved it. I find the whole process so interesting to me, and there's all the dynamics that can take place on the set. And one of the great things is that you got these actors with a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts, and you try to get it to work within the sequence of the scene. And when it's good and there's these moments that surprise you, it's like a great moment. And you're always looking for a little moment here and a little moment there. So when you hit those periodically, it just, you know, it gets to you and it excites you in a way that's hard to really describe. And that's part of what, you know, you look for, those moments that are like magic. And you're not always sure where they are. You're just wondering, can we find something else? Can we find another moment? And you're just always in search of it. You can always get a scene to work on a certain level, but can you find that extra moment 2 or 3 times during the film that takes it above?
And are you pushing for it, or are you just allowing it to happen, hoping it happens?
I don't think you can push it, because the second you start to push it, then you're making demands on it, and you start to squeeze it. I think you got to create, what I always think is the create an atmosphere that's so loose that out of that freedom, something happens that you go, whoa, that you couldn't even describe. Is when you're saying, why don't you do this and that, then you've got something that's already planned. And that can be fine. But if you can find the moment that you can't describe to anyone else, and once you see it, everyone knows what it is, it comes out of a looseness, out of a certain freedom. So that's what I try to create, that not the guy saying, stand here, do that, because it restricts the performance too much.
Let me talk about actors. We mentioned Hoffman. In the end, what? What do you say best about him? Not in terms of best and most praised, but give me the defining quality of Dustin Hoffman.
I think he's willing to try and experiment a lot. And if he's comfortable enough and he's full of enough ideas, and if you can try it and experiment and play with it, then he finds things that dazzle you periodically. And I think you got to give him a certain amount of room, and then you pull him in and you let him go and you pull him in, because he's full of ideas and things. And some ideas don't work, but some ideas are worthwhile. And I've always enjoyed it, and I think we share a similar sense of humor, so that you can go, no. Well, all right, let's try that. Let's try it. And then out of that, he's very smart, and he's got some talent that you can't describe. He just hits a moment that's, you know, worth one picture is worth, you know, 1,000 words or whatever. He just does it periodically.
Cruise.
Tom, I think, as I say in there, I think he was really underrated in terms of his performance, but that's a long time ago. Has enormous commitment to work and like an astounding discipline. to constantly do better. I mean, it's not a guy who's sort of like, okay, I'm the good-looking guy and I'm going to make a lot of money, whatever. From the first time I met him, he's got this focus to try to do something, better, and just has this work ethic that's extraordinary. And he's got the ability. And he'll always struggle for a long time until we'll look back and realize that he's done some very good work, because he's this good-looking guy and he's kind of personable. And that's always something we always dismiss.
You got to hide behind that.
Yeah. But he has a lot of ability.
Warren Beatty.
Warren is, it's interesting. You'd love to have seen Warren do more movies than he did, because I think he's really can do some. I think in the area of comedy, has an amazing kind of ability that he can get humor out of very little moments. I think his performance in Heaven Can Wait is extraordinary, and in Shampoo, and I think you see him, through the years. I'd love to have seen him do more things, but he is so cautious before he can finally make that commitment.
Cautious is not the word.
And
for
he's
it.
a terrific person, and he's, he's great to be with.
And he's engaged by life.
Yes, and and I have to say, and I know whenever I've talked about it and never to write it, I mean, he's great to work with. I mean, we had a great experience, on Bugsy, and tackling a movie that was fairly complicated, and he was willing to take a character who crosses the line. I mean, the movie starts out, he kissed the wife and kids goodbye, he goes downtown, he finds some woman, he sleeps with her, goes downtown and shoots a guy in the head and says goodbye to the wife and the kids, and that's in the first 5 minutes. Yeah. And you go, my God, what kind of monster this is? And then he begins to evolve, that you understand why people talk about Bugsy Siegel like he was a wonderful guy. And you say, but he killed people. And that contradiction, that duality makes for an interesting, character. Frightening on one hand, and yet people say, he was terrific. Yeah, he was a wonderful guy. But he was willing to take those moments that I think in Bugsy show an incredible, frightening human being periodically. And I think Warren stepped up to that, and I think he was really
And De Niro?
great. And De Niro is, I've had the fortune, now it's 2 movies in a row.
Sleepers and now this.
Sleepers and this. And he's... he always will get his attention in that other area where he's, when he's worked in Raging Bull, which is one of the great performances, and in Goodfellas, etc. But when in some of these other roles that he's done in such subtlety, I think if you really watch the work, it is amazing what he gets to in a way that surprises you. He has a humorous side. If you think of him in Brazil, he created a character that if you watch it, you go, my God, this is really interesting work. He doesn't always get the credit in those other areas, but terrific, character. Much more internal in trying to figure things out, and when you talk about it, because he's much quieter and everything else. But he really has a quality that you can just let the camera sit on it and know that this mind is working and trying to think of things, and you see it. It's that the simplicity of the work that comes out on film.
People talk about him. I don't know him, but I met him, but I don't know him. That he's as good as we've got as an actor. Yet he is quiet, and I mean, I don't know what and he's not necessarily the most glib person you ever met either.
There's a kind of...
What does that say about acting? I don't know what it says, but...
Well, I don't think you have to be, there are different ways. I mean, Dustin is much more articulate and vocal, and Warren certainly is. And then you have those who are much more quiet and much more shy in a way, as De Niro is. But they all ultimately have to deliver on the screen. And when you put a camera there and they're 30 feet high, that something in the eyes or behind the eyes connects to us in a way, and we can't figure it out. I just saw Spencer Tracy the other day in some old movie, and you see him, other actors, they don't, they look like they're in a movie from the 30s, and he looks like he's in a modern movie that was made today.
Yeah.
There's something about him, and you can't explain Spencer Tracy, that he just works. There's something about that. And I don't think you can't even teach it. You can refine moments, you can have better moments, but whatever that is, that some people have that ability that that comes through the screen that makes it work.
You can have a career without it, but you'll never be great unless you have it.
Yeah.
And you can see it, and you can spot it. You can see it in a young actor.
You can see it in a young actor. Sometimes you can't see it in meeting the person. Sometimes you have to actually, they live on screen.
It takes somebody who's a young actor coming into his own, like Billy Crudup. Mm-hmm. You see it?
Well, we use them in Sleepers. I
know you did. That's why I brought it up.
I saw him on videotape.
Yeah.
You know, because he was with a group of actors, and I hadn't had a chance to meet him yet, so I happened to see it on the videotape. And the second I saw it on the videotape, I thought, well, this guy is really fascinating.
But was it the eyes and all of that?
I don't know what it is.
But something you said.
You can watch 50 people and you'll see one, and all of a sudden you kind of look and you go, what is that all? It's something that gets you.
Now, can most people do that, or is that what good directors can do?
In terms of spotting it?
Spotting it.
I think you have to have. I think you have to have an eye for who can work, you know, who can do something. Not only what they can do when they come in and meet you, but that they can be even that much better when you're on the floor doing it. Some people can only do it there at the table, and that's as good as they're going to get. And others, once they get onto the floor, are going to suddenly shine.
You ever had an actor come in and do a bad job, and you say, "I'll take him. I think he can deliver"?
Yeah, I've had, yes, because I think sometimes you just know it, even though they can't do the performance
in the audition.
But you can sense enough that you can have confidence and use them. I used, well, there's a number of them, but I'll never forget when Paul Reiser came in. Yeah. And Paul Reiser, who only was with a friend, he wasn't even, you know, coming in to read. And so someone said, "Why don't you read him?" And he couldn't read at all.
Yeah.
He couldn't do anything. But I cast him in the movie, and literally I'd give him lines before the scene, the idea to work on, and let him do that. And just in terms of developing his kind of character, you know, what he's really kind of evolved into with his, you know, television show. Some actors can give you a performance, but it'll always be the same performance. And it will never surprise you, and it'll never get better than that moment. And others will do it in another way, and it's the unexplained.
And what difference can you make in getting it out of them?
Well, what you try to do is create the atmosphere that they're comfortable enough, because if an actor is inhibited, it kind of shuts down, and then they're just really trying to get the lines out. And when there's that moment, you know, other things happen. I mean, like suddenly they're going to talk and they stop and then they say the line, and all of a sudden that moment, that moment that seems slightly inarticulate becomes very engaging to us, as if they're struggling with the words. Now, they may have been struggling with the dialogue. It won't make any difference. But the fact is, how do they communicate to that other person? What do they say, or what don't they say? That happens. And that's none of us can tell what that's all about, but we can see it, and a lot of directors can say, yeah, that person's got that.
You know what amazes me about this? It's very much like sports in the following way. First of all, it's instinctive. Secondly, it is about eliminating and reducing tension so that, you know,
yes,
you are natural, so that the swing, if it's golf, you know, is comfortable and
right,
loose, or throwing a baseball. All of that, which is performance, in part kinetic performance, works best if you eliminate all those things that get in the way of naturalness.
Right.
Same thing's true with acting.
Yes, I think it's a good analogy to that. And you'll see sometimes, like a pitcher in the first inning or two, they haven't gotten settled in. They haven't found that, you know, that groove, that zone, whatever you want to call it, and then they get there and they shine.
Yeah, that's the reason in the first moments of a big game, frequently people miss shots if it's basketball, because they haven't.
Same thing with performers who come out, you know, entertainers that go onto the stage, and for a minute or two they haven't quite got it together yet, and then all of a sudden they hit it and they go, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes there are those who are just mechanical. They can do certain things, but they never take you to another place.
Yeah. I can see it in interviews constantly. You look at an interview, people who have been interviewed 1,000 times, politicians and others, you sit down and you can see, even some of the best, the first couple of questions, and then you can just visibly see swinging into a rhythm where they're conversational, where the tightness of, am I going to say the wrong thing, what's going to happen here, begins to fade away, and then you engage in a conversation that works for them. This is, I assume that of all the movies you've made, none gives you any more pride than this, Diner, or not?
Well, it's the first movie, so it stands for that alone, and it certainly has a life. So I'm always very proud of it. Avalon touches me in a certain way.
Because of its biographical.
Its biographical nature, and something about it that I can't explain that gets to people. I talk to more people that have seen Avalon now and talk about it, about their family, and it may be very different. I mean, I've spoken to people who have come from Japan or Norway, and they talk about it the same as their family. How? I don't know. That's the mystery of movies. And they talk about it in time. Sometimes they become extremely emotional in trying to discuss it. I make that connection because it's so close to my family. you know, you can never figure out what is the best of your movies because they're all, and my movies have been all over the place, so I can't even begin to, you know, make a judgment. They're just different films that affect you in a different way.
Your family, your parents were born in Russia, were they not, or Eastern Europe?
No, my parents were born in Baltimore, and my
Your
grandparents
grandparents,
come from
yeah.
Eastern Europe.
Your parents, your father had a appliance store?
Mm-hmm. He was the one that started Discount in Baltimore, just like the movie. They would give out these little cards, and he said, if you come, you'll get a discount.
Yeah.
And it didn't say what or whatever. Somebody had this card and show up. Can get a discount. Well, come here, and they'll give you something off on that.
It could have been Sam Walton. And when you went away to make movies or whatever you were going to do, to find your way in entertainment, he said to you, or did he, if it doesn't work, come back here and you'll find a place for you in the appliance store?
Yes. But my big ambition in life was not to work in the appliance store. That was my big.
I know.
My father was like a true businessman, because when I first started writing and I wasn't selling anything, and he said, so what's going on? I said, I'm not selling anything. He said, well, at least you've got inventory.
That's great. You've got product you can sell.
That's right.
If it ever catches on.
And later on, a couple years later, and I had sold a bunch of things, he said, how you doing? I said, I'm selling everything. He says, you got no inventory? A real businessman.
What was the first break?
First break was a show called Loman and Barkley that I did in Los Angeles in 1969. First show I did.
As a writer?
I was a writer and became a writer-performer on it. And worked with Craig Nelson, who was in Coach, and because we were in acting school together. And then we got a job working on that show, and we wrote and performed every week. Did it for a year. And that was the beginning.
And then you two had a collaboration there for a while, didn't
We
you?
worked together. We played local clubs in L.A., and then we did some variety shows, and then Craig wanted to concentrate on acting. And I started to focus more on writing, and then eventually the big break probably is when I did Carol Burnett Show, in terms of that was like an established show, and I was one of the writers on that.
Where they paid serious money.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because actually, Loman and Barkley, I think we got paid, I think it was $125 a week, you know, which was like, you know, this is terrific, you know, But that was the first real job, was Burnett.
And what happened after that?
From that, I got involved with Mel Brooks and did 2 films with him, Silent Movie and High Anxiety. And
As a writer?
As a writer, although I played a little part in High Anxiety as a demented bellhop and the kind of the psycho takeoff, you know.
He was here the other night. He is still uproariously funny.
He is.
Doing 2,000-Year-Old Man. You know, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
He can take any line you feed him and run with it.
He is a wild man. To sit and talk with him has been some of the great times that I've had in my life. Just he'll go on about some things. I really love the man. And for 3 years I wrote with him, and I was able to be on the set when he was shooting, and that was really, in a sense, the great apprenticeship for me, because in watching him work on a day-to-day basis, I got a chance to understand film. And so then I began to think, well, what happens if the camera's over here rather than there? And what happens if you did this? And that was the beginning of me beginning to think, how would I do it?
Yeah.
And so I really think of it as a great apprenticeship.
Thinking of that, Robin Williams, Good Morning Vietnam. How do you define him?
Well, you can't. I mean, he is, first of all, he's one of the sweetest people that you'll ever meet. You know, I mean, he's got an enormous heart and incredibly compassionate, and an astounding mind, you know, he is so funny. And we had an interesting time, because he would learn with the Vietnamese. He began to learn the language so he could talk to them. I mean, he really desperately wanted to understand them, and he would hang around with them when we weren't shooting to know more about them, you know. And then I think that you see their relationship to him in the movie is really their relationship to Robin. And we had some great things that took place.
He's the most improvisational guy there is alive in show business.
Yeah. We did a lot of, what's so funny is we did a lot of improvisational on the radio thing, which is, you know, only makes up probably about 12 minutes of the movie, but we were shooting so much stuff, and then it was a little bit like kind of Sandlot football, because we would do one take and I'd come in and said, you know, the thing about that is kind of interesting, but I wonder if we can do something about this, and how about a little thing here, and all right. Then I'd run back and then we'd shoot it, and he would do all that, and he would have these incredible moments. But we worked so fast that when we finally left and he called me up, he said, listen, do you think any of that stuff is going to work at all, any of that radio stuff? You know, I said, Robin, I think we got more than we're going to. He says, really? Because if it doesn't, maybe we can build another thing. I'll pay for it, you know what I mean, so we can shoot. Because he couldn't remember what he had done, and he was just all off the top of his head for that section of the film.
Does that come from the fact that his work on the street?
I think it comes from, you know...
Just talent.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few guys that can work that way. I mean, Jonathan Winters, you know, in a generation before, who was just, you know, you give him a glass and he can do 3.5 minutes on water and whatever and turn it into glass. You know, they have that mind that can, you know, free fall all over the place and go through who knows what. And they are a different kind of breed. What was interesting in terms of, you know, Robin is that he has that ability, but he was able to kind of, you know, hold it in and had the discipline that he can do scenes and talk to people and be, you know, a credible character as opposed to some guy who can just be funny. He finally learned to listen, you know, to another actor and deal with all those moments and to relax well enough, you know, which has to be part of acting as well. You can't always be doing all that. You got to be relaxed in a way that you're allowing for this interplay to take place. And once he got those elements in line, then he was really off to the races.
Who do you want to work with you haven't worked with? I mean, do you have conversations with people and say, look, as Hoffman did with De Niro in terms of looking for a product where they could work together?
I think there's probably, you know, an endless number of people. I mean, people that, you know, were coming up, you know, new actors and actors that have been around. I mean, there's just so many. I mean, there is so much talent out there in a way that you're always wondering, what would it be like if I can work with, you know, this person? I wonder if this, you know, it's too open-ended to probably answer.
Are there a lot more actors and actresses that, you know what I mean? I mean, when I think of people I want to talk to you about, I think more of actors than I do of actresses.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true. I think what it says is, especially today, I think it's extremely difficult for women because so much of movies today have become action-oriented pieces that are like hardware films and not about, you know, people. So the women have had less meaty roles, you know, than the men. And of course, a lot of the men aren't doing roles that are really meaty. They're just in these, you know, these kind of mechanical devices that are put out there with people running in front of fireballs all the time. And so if you go back to the 30s and the 40s and into the 50s, the women had, you know, some, you know, great defining roles. And that has been lost, I think, in this generation of film that is so devoid of relationships, etc., that it's become just action heroes. And I think that's made it very difficult for women to find some good roles.
Has Barry Levinson gone to Warner's, Fox, Paramount, and said, I want to do this, and they turned you down?
In terms of a film?
Yeah. In other words, when you come up with a product, do they say, Levinson has delivered, let him go, do it?
I've been fortunate. I think that most of the films I wanted to do, I've done. And then now, that's the one side. The other side is, having made the movie, the distribution side has been extremely reluctant with some of the movies, you know, once they're done, because they don't fit.
Like what?
Well, you take Bugsy, for example. When they originally, the distribution people saw Bugsy, they thought, well, it's a gangster movies, and gangster movies aren't doing well. And we had the hardest time to explain that this wasn't just going to be another gangster film, that this was something else. And then by the time we got all the, you know, nominations and everything else, we were positioned in very, you know, second-run houses and whatever. We struggled desperately in the early days with Bugsy to get that movie on the right track.
And how could that have been done differently? How could you have avoided that mistake? Well, or was that a mindset that was not to be altered?
It's a mindset is that all of a sudden gangster movies are not going to do well, therefore you can't do well, even though we were very different from what anyone else was doing at that time. We were kind of bending that genre. Yeah. And you struggle. So you struggle if you make Avalon, that you got it made, but they don't know how to sell it. They keep saying, well, how are we going to sell it? It's just a family thing. How do we sell it?
And then you take a movie like Dustin Hoffman, who's brilliant in this film, was also in Mad Game, whatever that film was, with Travolta.
Mad City.
Hoffman and Travolta. Now, is that going to win and bring them into the theaters or not? You would think yes. Answer, no.
Right.
What does that say?
I don't know, you know, because it's not about how good or bad the movie is in its first week, right? There's a lot of
I
movies
thought
that
it was
aren't
about
very
how good or bad it was in its first night.
You know what I'm saying? First weekend,
Yeah.
right. And what happens is that weekend, that first weekend is not based on quality. It's based on how do you get the people to the movie theater. Now, the people don't come to the movie theater. You have to assume that the 30-second spot is not good enough, or it seems as if it's too dramatic. Something isn't exciting enough to get them into the movie theater, forgetting whether it's good or bad.
Is there a story you want to sell that you can't, a story you want to tell that you can't sell?
I can't think of it right at this
And
moment.
so there's
but I'm
nothing
sure
burning
there
in your
is.
heart to do that you've
there's-
said, it's not, I can't sell it. Forget
Well,
it. They
I'm
won't
sure
buy
there
it.
will be. I'm
Yeah.
sure there will be. I mean, I've always sort of struggled of working at studios and doing conventional studio
You
movies.
seem to have struggled to sort of push the envelope somehow.
Yeah.
To say, I want to test this. What does that say?
Well, I mean, it's an odd place that I've been in, that I've kind of been in clashing with the studio and yet working at a studio. Right. And sometimes you can win and you lose with them.
Who's informed you most as a director? Who has, if you look at who you are and what you do, and you've got to go and give credit, who are you going to give credit to?
In terms of an influence?
Influence, whether it's somebody you read about, somebody that you talked to, somebody that you had a hands-on experience with.
I don't think there is any, you know what it comes down to? I've always found that somehow I've moved along in a career without this knowing where I'm going or what I'm going to do with my life. I never knew I was going to be a writer. I never knew that I would ultimately, do any of these things. I never knew that I would ultimately get to be a director. None of those things were in this plan. I kind of meandered along and came to these things through different odd circumstances, working in television and evolving into film. And I don't know that I've been influenced by as much as the fact that I am so fascinated by characters and stories, and they come to me in a way that you finally try to write it or read it and you want to get it made because there's a way you see it. So I can be in awe of, say, John Ford as a director and say this man was truly brilliant, and you can watch movie after movie and see what he did. But I could never apply anything that John Ford did to what I do because the second I read something, I have an image in my head about the way it ought to go. And so I can't utilize. I mean, I talked to some directors and said, well, I love that shot when Ford did the thing, he came around, blah, 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 when Kubrick did the thing, and they use it and they understand it. I don't know how to do it. Yeah. I can admire it, but I don't know how to apply it to what I do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think you look at certain people and as giants. I mean, there's no question that Orson Welles was an extraordinary talent, whether it was in Citizen Kane, or whether you look at The Magnificent Ambersons, which is like, a movie that's been cut up, has moments in it that are so astounding. You say that this guy, must have come to Earth, from some other place, who had a different mindset.
Yeah.
And the way he orchestrated sound and the way he moved his camera. He was a brilliant, director in all ways. I could admire it. I could never be able to, say, all right, I'm going to borrow, I'm going to use. I can't do any of that. So there's this great talents out there that I can only sit back as an audience and enjoy.
What's your biggest disappointment?
Biggest disappointment? Well, there's always a bunch of things that you don't think you ever, I think that probably Toys for me was the biggest, because I was really pushing to try to do an absurdist, surrealistic comedy that was like, people living in a box that was a house that opened up, it was just a complete otherworldly experience. And I think that got caught in a thing where the people who were at the studio left, and then the people who were there so despised it, and it never quite had a chance to see the light of day. And then the reaction to it was so crazed in a way that I never understood it. I remember when Vincent Canby said that it included a decapitation sequence, and I went, gee, the woman's head pops off. She's a doll. She's got springs in her neck. It's a doll, a decapitation sequence.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, well, what did I do here? I mean, I know I was pushing the envelope to try to do something we've not seen in American film, but I didn't know that there people were, in that area when he gets so angry about it. At best, you can say, well, it was a nice attempt. It didn't quite work. But So that would be the biggest, I think, disappointment. On the other hand, you can't run away from trying and gambling, because then you begin to inhibit yourself, and then you shut your system down and you keep looking for what's going to work. And you never know that. You got to go on your gut. What do I like? What makes me laugh? What makes me cry? What pulls me in? What makes me want to take this journey and then bring other people into it? And the second you start to guess it and figure it out and work the odds of it all, then you destroy it.
So you would not have made Wag the Dog at the beginning when you first saw it because it didn't touch you, give anything to you. Yet when you began to work with it and say, if we could go this way, it spoke to you and you wanted to do it.
You're talking about the original, when reading the original
right,
screenplay and book. Yeah, because I didn't see enough that got me motivated enough to make that commitment. And then finally, when we evolved to the script, that David did, then you can get all excited about all of the ideas and the characters you're going to play with. And then you take that shot. You say, okay, politics and Hollywood, is that big commercial stuff? I don't know. It makes me laugh. And you say, and it's amusing and it's about something, you got to go for it and you see what happens.
Barry Levinson, thank you very much. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Terrific.
Thanks for coming. The film is Wag the Dog, opens this past weekend at local theaters in a number of markets around the country this coming weekend. Thank you for joining us for the hour. We'll see you tomorrow night.